Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. My husband works for the military. I found on the deep web about his secret project. I've always been curious by nature. You know that feeling when something just doesn't sit right with you, and you can't shake the urge to dig deeper. That's been me for as long as I can remember. I'm the kind of person who stays up way too late scrolling through conspiracy forums, falling down rabbit holes of unsolved mysteries, and watching every top 10 creepiest video on YouTube. But I never thought my curiosity would lead me to something so unsettling. It all started a few months ago. My husband, Ryan, has worked for the military for about 5 years now. He's always been tight-lipped about what he does, and I never pushed him on it. It's not like I didn't trust him, of course I did. But I figured it was better not to know. After all, the military's full of secrets, right? The less I knew, the safer we were. Or so I thought. Lately though, Ryan's behaviour had been off. He'd been coming home later than usual. His eyes hollow and tired, like he hadn't slept in days. He used to be so talkative, always cracking jokes and telling me about his day. Well, what he could share anyway. But now, he'd barely say a word, just slumping into his chair and staring blankly at the TV, like a zombie. One night, after he had fallen asleep on the couch, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. Was he in some kind of trouble? Was his work taking a toll on him? My mind ran wild with possibilities, each one worse than the last. And then I remembered something that seemed harmless enough at the time, but now sent a chill down my spine. A few years ago, when we were at a BBQ with some of his military buddies, I overheard one of them mention the deep web. They were joking about how it's full of crazy stuff, things that could make a man lose his mind if he looked too deep. At the time, I didn't think much of it, just some guys being guys talking big. But now, it felt like a clue. Like maybe that's where I'd find the answers I needed. So, I did something I'd never done before. I started researching how to access the deep web. I know. It was stupid. I'd heard all the warnings about how dangerous it could be, but I was desperate. Desperate to understand what was happening to my husband. To find some kind of explanation for the dark cloud that had settled over our lives. It took me a few days to figure it out, but eventually, I found myself staring at the screen of my laptop, the Tor browser open, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like I was doing something wrong, something I'd regret, but I couldn't stop myself. I started searching for anything related to military projects, government secrets, classified operations. Whatever I could think of that might lead me to the truth. Most of what I found was garbage, just the usual conspiracy theories and nonsense. But then I stumbled upon something, a link buried deep within a forum thread, written in cryptic language that didn't make much sense at first. The only thing I could decipher was the title, Project Silent. Something about it drew me in. It wasn't flashy or sensationalized like the other links I'd found. It was simple, almost clinical, like whoever posted it didn't want to attract attention. My hands trembled as I clicked on it, the screen going black for a moment, before loading what looked like a simple, plain text document. As I started reading, my breath caught in my throat. The words were vague, full of technical jargon I didn't fully understand, but the implications were clear enough. Project Silent was some kind of military operation, something involving people. There were mentions of volunteers and behavioural modification, phrases like sensory deprivation and neurological conditioning. I felt a sickening dread settle in my stomach. Was this what Ryan was involved in? I wanted to stop reading, to close the laptop and pretend I'd never seen it, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. The deeper I went, the worse it got. There were descriptions of experiments, ones that made my skin crawl, things that sounded more like torture than research. And the worst part, the document wasn't old. It was recent, ongoing. I sat there in the dark, the only sound in the room, the low hum of the refrigerator, my mind racing. I didn't know what to think, what to believe. Was this real? Could it be? And if it was, what did it mean for Ryan? What did it mean for us? I closed the laptop and tried to steady my breathing. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just some elaborate hoax, some twisted person's idea of a joke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was something about it, something that felt too real, too detailed to be fake. And that's when I noticed something else. A small, barely visible icon in the corner of the screen. It looked like an eye, just a simple black and white graphic, but it made my heart skip a beat. I hadn't seen it before, and I didn't know how long it had been there. I moved the cursor over it, hesitating for a moment before clicking. Nothing happened. No new window opened, no link was followed, nothing. It was like the eye was just watching me. I slammed the laptop shut and pushed it away, suddenly feeling like I was being watched, like someone was standing right behind me. I glanced around the room, but of course, there was no one there. Just shadows. Ryan stirred in his sleep, mumbling something under his breath, and I jumped, my nerves on edge. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down, telling myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting my curiosity get the better of me. But even as I crawled into bed that night, pulling the covers up to my chin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd opened a door that should have stayed closed. And whatever was on the other side, it was looking right back at me. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My mind was still reeling from what I'd found, and the image of that creepy little eye icon lingered in my thoughts. Ryan was already up, moving around the kitchen with the same distant look he'd had for weeks. I watched him from the hallway, trying to see if there was anything different about him, something that would confirm my fears or, better yet, prove them wrong. But he was just Ryan, or at least he looked like Ryan. Except for the dark circles under his eyes, the stiff, robotic movements, and that constant blank expression on his face. It was like he was on autopilot, going through the motions without really being there. "Morning," I said, trying to sound normal, like I wasn't about to have a nervous breakdown. He grunted in response, barely acknowledging me as he poured himself a cup of coffee. I forced a smile and joined him at the table, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to ask him about his work, about what was going on, but I didn't know how. How do you confront your husband about something like that? "Hey honey, I found this disturbing military project on the deep web last night. Anything you want to tell me?" Yeah, that wasn't going to work. Instead, I went for something more subtle. "You look tired," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Work's been rough lately, huh?" He didn't answer right away, just stared into his coffee like it held the secrets of the universe. Finally, he nodded, his eyes never leaving the mug. "Yeah, you could say that." I waited for him to say more, but he didn't. It was like pulling teeth, trying to get him to talk these days. I felt the frustration bubbling up inside me, but I pushed it down, reminding myself that I needed to be patient. If there was something going on, he'd tell me when he was ready. Right? The day dragged on in a haze of unease. I tried to go about my usual routine, cleaning, running errands, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, but I couldn't focus on anything. All I could think about was that document, those words that had burrowed into my brain like a parasite. What if it was true? What if Ryan was involved in something horrible, something dangerous? That night, after Ryan went to bed, I found myself drawn back to the laptop, like a moth to a flame. I knew I shouldn't. I knew I was opening myself up to more fear, more questions I might not want the answers to, but I couldn't help it. I had to know more. I opened the Tor browser again, my hands shaking as I navigated back to the forum where I'd found the link. But when I got there, the thread was gone. Just like that, wiped from existence. No trace of it left, as if it had never been there at all. Panic rose in my throat. Had I imagined it? No, I was sure of what I'd seen. I tried searching for Project Silent again, but nothing came up. Nothing even close. It was like it had vanished, leaving me with nothing but my own anxiety. And then I noticed something new. An email notification. My heart skipped a beat as I opened my inbox. It was from an address I didn't recognize, just a string of random letters and numbers. No subject line, no text in the body, just a single attachment, a video file. I stared at it, dread pooling in my stomach. I knew I shouldn't open it. Every instinct screamed at me to delete it, to shut down the laptop and forget any of this had ever happened. But I couldn't. I was too deep in now, too far down the rabbit hole to turn back. I clicked on the file, and the video player opened. For a few seconds, the screen was black, and then a grainy image flickered into view. It was security camera footage, shaky and distorted, like it was barely holding together. The room it showed was small and dimly lit, with cinder block walls and a metal door. A single chair sat in the middle of the room, and on that chair was a person. Or at least, I think it was a person. The figure was slumped over, their head hanging low, their arms tied to the armrests. They were wearing what looked like a hospital gown, but it was filthy, stained with something dark and wet. The video was silent, but I could imagine the ragged breathing, the shuffling of feet on concrete. Then the door opened, and someone walked in. I couldn't see their face, just their silhouette, tall and imposing, their movements deliberate and slow. They approached the figure in the chair, and for a moment they just stood there, looking down at them. Then they reached out, gently lifting the person's chin to face the camera. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. The person in the chair, it was Ryan, or at least it looked like him. The features were the same, but there was something wrong, something off about his face. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly ahead, unblinking. His skin was pale, almost grey, and there was a thin line of blood running from his nose down to his chin. He looked hollow, like whatever made him human had been sucked out, leaving only an empty shell behind. The person standing over him leaned in close, their face still hidden from view. I watched in horror as they whispered something into Ryan's ear, something I couldn't hear, but that made his already blank expression twist into something even more disturbing. A look of pure, abject terror. The video ended abruptly, the screen cutting to black, leaving me sitting there in stunned silence. I didn't know what to think, what to feel. Was it real? Some kind of sick prank? But how could anyone have known what I'd found? What I'd been looking at? I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I needed answers. I needed to know what was happening to my husband, who or what was behind this. But most of all, I needed to know if that video was real. Because if it was, then Ryan wasn't the man I thought he was, and I wasn't sure if he ever would be again. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ryan's hollow face from the video. Those lifeless eyes staring right through me. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, a twisted version of my life that I didn't know how to escape. I wanted to believe that what I saw wasn't real, that it was some kind of sick joke, but the more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. The late nights, the distant behaviour, the way Ryan had been slowly unravelling. It all pointed to something far darker than I'd ever imagined. And now, I was starting to wonder if I'd ever really known the man I married. The next day, Ryan left for work as usual, his expression as blank as ever. I watched him go, my stomach churning with anxiety. I didn't want him to leave. I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts, but I also couldn't bear to be near him, not when I wasn't sure if the man I was looking at was really my husband or some kind of imposter, a puppet controlled by forces I couldn't understand. After he left, I sat down at the kitchen table, my laptop in front of me, and tried to make sense of everything. The video, the document, that strange eye icon, they were all pieces of a puzzle that I was desperate to solve, but the more I tried to fit them together, the more confused I became. I needed answers, and I knew I wasn't going to find them just sitting here, spinning my wheels. So I did something I'd been avoiding. I went to Ryan's office. I hadn't been in there in months. He always kept it locked, saying it was for security reasons, that he had classified documents in there. I never questioned it, trusting him like any wife would. But now I was questioning everything. I needed to know what he was hiding, and I wasn't going to let a locked door stop me. I stood in front of the door, the key in my hand, my heart racing. It felt wrong, invading his privacy like this. But after everything I'd seen, I couldn't afford to care. I slipped the key into the lock and turned it, the door clicking open with a soft creak. The office was dark, the curtains drawn tight, blocking out the daylight. I flipped on the light, half expecting to find something horrific waiting for me, but the room looked normal, ordinary. A desk, a bookshelf, a few framed certificates on the wall. Nothing out of the ordinary. But that's what made it even more unsettling. The normalcy of it all. It was like the room was hiding something, like the truth was buried just beneath the surface, waiting for me to uncover it. I started with the desk, pulling open the drawers and rifling through the papers inside. Most of it was just mundane work stuff, reports, memos, the usual military bureaucracy. But then I found a folder buried under a stack of files with the words "Silent, Restricted" stamped on the front in bold red letters. My hands shook as I opened it, the pages inside thick with dense text and diagrams that I could barely understand. But one word stood out, repeated over and over again. Subject. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding harder with each one. It was a log, a detailed account of experiments, tests, whatever they were doing to these subjects. There were charts tracking their responses, notes on their behaviour, and photos. Grainy, black and white images of people, men, women, even some who looked like they could be teenagers. All hooked up to machines, their faces blank, their eyes lifeless, just like Ryan's in the video. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just some project, this was torture. They were using people, experimenting on them, turning them into, I didn't even know what, weapons? Zombies? Something worse. I slammed the folder shut, my mind racing. I needed to get out of there, to think, to figure out what the hell was going on. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small flash drive, half hidden under a stack of papers on the desk. I grabbed it without thinking, slipping it into my pocket as I hurried out of the room. I didn't know what was on it, but I had a feeling it was important. Maybe it would have the answers I needed. Back in the living room, I plugged the drive into my laptop, my fingers trembling as I waited for it to load. A single file appeared on the screen, labelled simply, Silent, Final. I hesitated for a moment, my mind screaming at me to stop, to not go any further, but I couldn't stop now. I clicked on the file. A video player opened, and I braced myself for what I was about to see. The screen flickered to life, showing another security camera feed, this one clearer than the last. It was the same room, the same chair, but this time, it wasn't Ryan sitting there. It was me. My blood ran cold as I stared at the screen, watching as the door to the room opened and someone walked in. I couldn't see their face, just like before, but they moved with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. They walked up to the figure in the chair, my figure, and placed a hand on my shoulder, leaning in close to whisper something in my ear. The camera zoomed in and I saw it, the same hollow expression, the same lifeless eyes staring back at me, and then, as if sensing my presence, the figure on the screen turned its head slowly toward the camera, those dead eyes locking onto mine through the screen. I screamed and slammed the laptop shut, backing away from the table as if it had burned me. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I'd just seen. How could that be me? How could any of this be real? But the evidence was right in front of me. The documents, the video, the experiments, everything pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Whatever Project Silent was, it wasn't just affecting Ryan, it was affecting me too. I didn't know how or why, but I knew I needed to find out. And I needed to do it fast before whatever was happening to him, whatever had happened to me, got any worse. I had to confront Ryan. I had to get the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. Because if I didn't, I wasn't sure if either of us would survive it. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to keep myself together. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that video, that image of myself, hollow and lifeless, staring back at me. My thoughts were racing, a chaotic storm of fear and confusion. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep pretending this wasn't happening. Something was very wrong, and it was closing in on us fast. When Ryan came home that evening, I was waiting for him. I tried to act normal, to keep the terror out of my voice, but it wasn't easy. Every time I looked at him, I saw that awful image from the video, and it took everything I had not to break down right then and there. He walked through the door, his expression as unreadable as ever, but there was something different about him tonight. Something more than just the exhaustion and distance that had become his new normal. It was like he was carrying a weight, something heavy and dangerous, and it made my skin crawl. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile that I didn't feel. "Rough day?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at me with those tired eyes that seemed to see right through me. Finally, he shrugged, dropping his bag by the door. "Yeah," he muttered. "You could say that." I watched him, trying to gauge his mood, trying to find an opening, but he was like a closed book. Every emotion locked away behind a wall I couldn't breach. I knew I had to be careful. If I pushed too hard, he might shut down completely, and then I'd lose my chance to get the truth. But I couldn't wait any longer. I had to know what was happening to us. "Ryan," I started, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. "I need to talk to you about something serious." He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or recognition. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by that same empty stare. "What is it?" he asked, his voice flat, almost resigned. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "It's about your work, about Project Silent." The change in him was instant. His whole body tensed, and his eyes narrowed, a flash of anger, or maybe panic, crossing his face. "How do you know about that?" he demanded, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I found some things," I admitted, choosing my words carefully. "Documents, a video. Ryan, I know something's wrong. I know they're doing things, terrible things, and I think it's affecting you. I think it's affecting both of us." He stared at me, his expression unreadable, but I could see the turmoil behind his eyes, the way his mind was racing. For a moment, I thought he might shut me out completely, refuse to say anything, but then he surprised me. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, and for the first time in weeks, he looked at me. Not through me, not past me, but really at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly, his voice laced with something like regret. "You shouldn't have gone looking." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "Ryan, what's going on? What is Project Silent? What are they doing to you? To us?" He hesitated, and for a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. But then he spoke, his voice low, barely more than a whisper. "It's not what you think," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "It started as a research project, something to help soldiers, enhance their abilities, make them more resilient. But it got out of control. The experiments, they weren't just on volunteers. They started using us, the staff. They wanted to see how far they could push it, how much they could change us." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "Change you? How?" He looked away, shame and fear warring on his face. "They used us as test subjects," he said, his voice hollow. "They did things to our minds, stripped away our emotions, our memories, our humanity. We became empty, like machines, programmed to follow orders without question." My breath caught in my throat. "Ryan, is that what's happening to you?" He nodded, his eyes haunted. "They took something from me, something I don't think I can ever get back. But it's not just me, it's you too. They've been watching us, controlling us. I don't know how or why, but I can feel it. We're not the same anymore. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my husband, was crumbling into dust. But why, Ryan? Why us? I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But it's not over. They're not done with us. They need something from us. Something I don't understand. And they'll do whatever it takes to get it. Terror gripped me. A cold, suffocating fear that wrapped around my heart like a vice. We have to get out of here, I said, my voice shaking. We have to run before they... It's too late, he interrupted, his voice flat, resigned. They're already here. Before I could react, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. My heart leapt into my throat, panic clawing at my chest as I reached out blindly for Ryan. But he was already gone. Ryan! I screamed, but there was no answer, just the deafening silence, broken only by the faint, rhythmic sound of someone breathing in the darkness. And then I felt it, a presence, cold and malevolent, closing in around me, suffocating me with its intensity. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but I knew it was there, watching, waiting. I stumbled backward, my mind racing, trying to find a way out, but I was trapped, the darkness pressing in on all sides. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the lights flickered back on. The room was empty. Ryan was gone, and I was alone. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something was still there, lurking just beyond the edge of the light, waiting for the right moment to strike. I knew then that I had to move, to get out of that house before whatever it was caught me, before it did to me what it had done to Ryan. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them, and bolted for the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard it, a low, guttural voice, whispering my name from somewhere deep in the shadows. Run. I didn't need to be told twice. I wrenched the door open and ran, not stopping to look back, not stopping to think. I just ran as fast as I could, away from the house, away from the nightmare that had consumed my life, praying that I could outrun whatever was coming for me. But deep down, I knew the truth. You can't outrun a shadow. I drove without a destination, my mind a chaotic storm of fear and confusion. The roads blurred under the dim glow of streetlights, and I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I needed to get away. But even as I sped through the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all pointless. Whatever was happening, whatever had taken Ryan, it was far beyond anything I could escape by simply running. After what felt like hours, I finally pulled over to the side of the road, my hands white-knuckling the steering wheel as I tried to catch my breath. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the sound of my heart hammering in my chest. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all, to piece together a plan, but I was coming up empty. And then my phone rang. The sound startled me so badly that I nearly jumped out of my skin. I fumbled for the phone, my hands still shaking, and saw Ryan's name on the screen. For a moment, I just stared at it, my heart pounding. Was it really him? Or was it some kind of trick, another twisted part of whatever nightmare I'd stumbled into? But I had no choice. I had to know. I answered the call, my voice trembling. Ryan! There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment I thought the line was dead. But then I heard it, a faint, almost inaudible whisper. Don't go back. My blood ran cold. Ryan, where are you? What's happening? Don't go back, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, like he was struggling to get the words out. It's a trap. They want you to open the door. A trap? What door? My mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying, but before I could ask, the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. What door was he talking about? What did they want from me? And then it hit me. The door in the basement. I had avoided the basement ever since we moved into the house. Ryan had always kept it locked, telling me it was just storage, nothing important. But now, I knew better. Whatever was happening, whatever Project Silent was, it was tied to that door, to whatever was hidden behind it. I knew I shouldn't go back. I knew that whatever was waiting for me there was something beyond my comprehension, something dangerous and terrifying. But I also knew that I couldn't leave it alone. I couldn't leave Ryan alone. Not when he was in danger, not when I was so close to the truth. I turned the car around and drove back to the house, my heart pounding with every mile. The streets were eerily quiet, the darkness pressing in on all sides, but I kept going, my resolve hardening with every passing second. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house loomed before me like a silent, malevolent shadow. The windows were dark, the front door slightly ajar, as if it had been expecting me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever was to come, and stepped out of the car. The air was thick with tension, the silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing me. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run, but I pushed forward, crossing the threshold into the house. The inside was just as dark and quiet as the outside, the only sound the creak of the floorboards under my feet as I made my way to the basement door. It was open. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. The door had always been locked, always sealed tight, but now it stood slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness peeking through the gap. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. This was it, the point of no return. Whatever was behind that door, it was the answer to everything, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it, but I had no choice. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and descended the stairs into the basement. The air grew colder with every step, the darkness thicker, almost suffocating. I reached the bottom and felt around for a light switch, but there was nothing, just pitch black darkness, so thick it felt like it was pressing in on me. And then I saw it. A faint, pulsing glow coming from the far end of the basement, illuminating a small metallic door set into the wall. The door was different from anything I'd ever seen, almost futuristic in its design, with no handle or keyhole, just a smooth, featureless surface. This was it, the door. I approached it slowly, the glow growing brighter as I neared, casting eerie shadows across the walls. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. As I reached out to touch the door, the glow intensified, and for a moment I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to stop, but I couldn't. I had to know. I pressed my hand against the door, and it slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small, dimly lit chamber beyond. The air inside was cold, sterile, and the walls were lined with monitors, wires, and strange machines that hummed softly. In the center of the room was a single chair, facing a large screen, and on that screen I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was me, but not just one of me, dozens of me, all staring back from the screen with that same hollow, lifeless expression I'd seen in the video. Each version of me was slightly different. Different clothes, different hairstyles, different expressions, but all of them were empty, like they were shells of a person, not really alive. And then the screen flickered, and the image changed. It was Ryan, but this wasn't the Ryan I knew. This was the Ryan from the video, the one who had been hollowed out, turned into something less than human. He was sitting in the chair, staring straight ahead, his eyes glassy and vacant, just like mine had been in the other video. "Welcome," a voice said, echoing through the chamber, and I realized it was coming from the screen. Ryan's lips moved, but the voice wasn't his. It was cold, mechanical, devoid of any emotion. "You've come a long way, but now it's time to finish this." "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fear and anger. "What do you want from us?" The image of Ryan on the screen didn't move, didn't blink. "We are silent," the voice replied, as if that answered everything. "We are the next step in human evolution, and you, my dear, have been chosen to join us." I backed away from the screen, my heart racing. "I don't want any part of this," I said, my voice shaking. "I just want my husband back. I want our lives back. The voice laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the chamber. There's no going back. You were part of this the moment you stepped through that door. The moment you let curiosity take hold. You and Ryan, your lives were ours from the start. I felt a surge of anger, of desperation. No, I said, my voice stronger now. I won't let you take him. I won't let you take me. The screen flickered again, and the image of Ryan shifted, becoming more distorted, more monstrous. You have no choice, the voice said. We are inside you, inside him. We are already part of you. The only question now is whether you will resist or embrace the inevitable. I clenched my fists, my mind racing, searching for a way out, a way to fight back. But the walls were closing in, the darkness pressing down on me, and I knew I was running out of time. But then I remembered something. Something Ryan had said on the phone. Don't go back. I didn't understand what he meant at first, but now it was starting to make sense. This place, this room, it was the heart of whatever Project Silent was. And if I was going to stop it, I had to destroy it. I had to make sure that whatever they were doing here, whatever they had done to us, couldn't be done to anyone else. I turned away from the screen, scanning the room for something, anything I could use. My eyes fell on a control panel near the door, wires snaking out from it like veins. I ran to it, my hands shaking as I frantically searched for some way to shut it down, to end this nightmare once and for all. And then I saw it, a small red button, almost hidden among the wires, with a single word etched above it. Terminate. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my hand down on the button, and the room erupted in chaos. Alarms blared. The machines began to spark and sputter, and the screen flickered violently as the image of Ryan distorted, twisting into something unrecognizable. The ground shook beneath me, the walls cracking as the entire chamber began to collapse. I stumbled toward the door, the heat and noise overwhelming me. But I knew I couldn't stop now. I had to get out. I had to escape before the whole place came down on top of me. I raced up the stairs, my legs burning with effort, the sound of the building collapsing behind me. I burst through the basement door and into the night air, gasping for breath as I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was far away from the house, from the horror that had consumed it. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. I turned back, half expecting to see the house in ruins, but it was still standing, silent and dark. But I knew it was over. I had destroyed whatever was in that basement, whatever had been trying to take us. But as I stood there, catching my breath, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't really over. That somehow, some part of Silent had survived, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. But for now, I was free. Ryan was free. And as I walked away from that house for the last time, I vowed that no matter what happened next, I would never let them take us again. I am a dark web hitman. My next victim is my sister. I never thought I'd end up like this. I mean, sure, I always had a knack for finding trouble, but nothing could have prepared me for what my life would become. A hitman. On the dark web, no less. It sounds like the kind of thing you only hear about in the darkest corners of the internet. But it's real. I'm real. And the money? It's insane. That's how they get you, how they reel you in. At first, it was small stuff. Petty theft, low-level deals, things that barely scratched the surface of morality. But eventually, they offered me something bigger, something I couldn't say no to. The first time I killed someone, I told myself it was just another job, just another payday. And it worked, for a while. But then, a few weeks ago, something changed. I was browsing the usual forums, those hidden places online where you don't use your real name, where no one asks questions. That's when I got a message. No username, just an encrypted email address. The message was brief, almost clinical. We need someone taken care of. Details attached. 50k up front, 50k after. I didn't recognize the address. But that wasn't unusual. I've gotten used to the anonymity. The attachment had the usual stuff: a name, a photo, an address, and a short description of the target. The money was good, better than good. I've done this enough times to know not to ask too many questions. It's always some sleazeball or lowlife. Drug dealer owes the wrong people money. A spouse who can't keep their hands to themselves. It's easier when you tell yourself they deserve it. But this time, as soon as I opened the file, my stomach dropped. It was her, Emily, my sister. Emily and I haven't been close in years. We grew up together, did everything together as kids. She was always the good one, straight A student, the one who took care of Mum when Dad left. Me, I went the other way. Started hanging out with the wrong crowd, getting into trouble, always looking for the next thrill. I moved out as soon as I could, and we drifted apart. Last I heard, she was working as a nurse, living in some small town a few hours away. She was always better than me, you know? Better person, better at life. The thought of her seeing what I'd become, what I'd done, was unbearable. So I made sure she didn't. I didn't even know she was married until I saw her wedding photos online. We hadn't talked in years, but there she was in that photo, smiling like she always did, happy and full of life. I hated seeing that smile, knowing how far apart we were, how different our lives had become. She didn't know who I was anymore. Hell, sometimes I didn't know who I was anymore. Seeing her name on that list, seeing her face in that photo, it was like someone punched me in the gut. What had she done to end up here? What could my little sister possibly have done to deserve this? And why me? The idea of someone else, one of the other guys on the forums, getting this job, it made my blood run cold. But what could I do? This was the life I chose, the path I walked every day. But Emily didn't belong here. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake, a mix-up. Maybe she was involved with something I didn't know about. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. Emily was clean, straight-laced, the kind of person who'd never even jaywalk, let alone get mixed up in something that would put her on a hit list. And the more I thought about it, the more it ate away at me. I should have walked away. I should have deleted the message, thrown my laptop in the river, and disappeared. But I couldn't. I had to know why. Who would want Emily dead? Who would pay that much money to have her erased from this world? I couldn't sleep that night. I just kept seeing her face in my mind. The little girl who used to hold my hand when we crossed the street, who used to read her school books out loud to me because I was too lazy to do my own homework. The woman who smiled in her wedding photos, oblivious to the monster her brother had become. Morning came too fast, and I felt like a zombie as I downed cup after cup of coffee, trying to clear the fog from my head. I needed to figure this out. I needed to know who was behind this, and more importantly, why. I pulled up the message again, scanned the details, no clues, just the name, the photo, and the address. Her address. I could feel my hands shaking as I closed my laptop, the realization settling in. There was only one way to get the answers I needed. I had to go to her. I had to see her, face to face, for the first time in years. I needed to know what the hell was going on before it was too late. So I packed a bag, threw it in the back of my car, and hit the road. The drive was long, too long. Every mile felt like a lifetime. Every twist and turn on that empty highway pulling me deeper into the unknown. My mind was racing, replaying every memory of her, every time I let her down, every time I turned my back on the only person who ever really cared about me. And now, I might be the one to take her life. I couldn't let that happen. I had to stop this, had to find out who was behind it, and make it right. But as I got closer to her town, a gnawing fear started to creep in. What if she didn't want to see me? What if she had no idea what kind of danger she was in? What if she'd already moved on, forgotten about her screw-up brother? But there was no turning back now. The sun was setting as I pulled into her driveway, my heart pounding in my chest. Her house was small but cozy looking. with a well-kept garden out front and a porch light glowing softly in the evening air. It was the kind of place that felt like home, a place where people lived normal, happy lives, a place I didn't belong, but I was here. I was doing this. I had to. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the front door, trying to muster the courage to get out of the car. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made your skin crawl, like something was watching you from the shadows. I shook it off, took a deep breath, and opened the car door. My feet felt heavy as I walked up the path to her door, every step echoing in the quiet night. I was about to knock when the door swung open, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with surprise. She looked the same, but different, older, maybe a little tired, but still Emily, still my sister. "Mike," she said, her voice shaky, like she couldn't believe it was really me. "What are you doing here?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I just stood there, staring at her, feeling like the biggest idiot in the world. She looked past me, scanning the street, like she was expecting someone else to show up. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I nodded, finally finding my voice. "Yeah, I just needed to see you," she smiled. That same warm smile I remembered from all those years ago. And for a moment, I almost forgot why I was there. Almost. Emily invited me in without hesitation, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I guess that's how she's always been, trusting, forgiving. Even after all these years, she still welcomed me into her home like nothing had changed. The living room was cozy, filled with the kind of warmth you only see in magazines. Soft lighting, a couple of family photos on the walls, and a thick knitted blanket draped over the back of the couch. It was a far cry from the dingy apartments and seedy motels I'd been holed up in for the past few years. She offered me a seat, and I hesitated for a second before sitting down on the couch. My hands were clammy, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I'd faced down some dangerous people in my time, but nothing compared to the terror I felt sitting across from my sister, knowing what I knew. "So," she said, breaking the silence as she sat down in the armchair opposite me. "What brings you here, Mike? I mean, I'm glad to see you, but it's been a while." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, it's been too long. I guess I just realized that, we're not getting any younger. Thought maybe it was time to reconnect." She nodded slowly, a thoughtful look on her face. "I've missed you, I always wondered what happened to you, where you ended up. I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to someone that you'd gone so far off the rails, you couldn't even see the tracks anymore? That you'd become the kind of person she'd probably run away from if she knew the truth?" "Yeah, I've missed you too," I lied, forcing a smile. It was easier than telling her the real reason I'd stayed away. Easier than telling her I didn't deserve to be a part of her life anymore. She got up and walked into the kitchen, returning a moment later with 2 mugs of tea. I took one, grateful for something to do with my hands. The warmth of the cup was grounding, something tangible in the middle of this surreal situation. She settled back into the armchair, wrapping her hands around her own mug. "Is everything okay with you?" she asked after a few sips. "I mean, really okay? You seem different." I didn't know how to answer that. How could I? The truth was so far from anything she could imagine. But before I could come up with a response, something else caught my attention. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had that creeping feeling again, like we weren't alone. I glanced around the room, but everything looked normal. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. "Emily," I started, my voice low, "have you noticed anything strange lately? Anything that feels off?" She raised an eyebrow, clearly confused by my question. "Strange? Like what?" "Like, I don't know. People watching you, weird phone calls, anything out of the ordinary." She shook her head, but I noticed a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "No, nothing like that. Why?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice even more. I've been dealing with some stuff, and I wanted to make sure you were safe. You're not in any trouble, are you? Emily stared at me for a long moment, like she was trying to read something in my expression. Mike! What's going on? You're scaring me. I could see the fear starting to creep into her eyes, and it broke my heart. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I wasn't supposed to be the one bringing danger into her life, but there was no turning back now. I had to know if she was in danger, if there was someone else involved, someone who had put her name on that list. Just answer me, Em, I pressed, my voice barely above a whisper. Please. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. Well, there was something, but it's probably nothing. I felt my heart skip a beat. What was it? A couple of weeks ago, I started getting these weird emails. They didn't say much, just random lines of text, like someone was trying to send me a message but it got scrambled. I thought it was spam or some kind of glitch, so I ignored them. But then, she trailed off, her eyes drifting to the window. The darkness outside seemed to press against the glass, thick and impenetrable. I could feel the tension in the room building, like the walls were closing in on us. Then what? I urged. Then I started getting these calls, she continued, her voice barely audible. But when I answered, there was just silence on the other end. Sometimes I'd hear a faint clicking sound, like someone was tapping on the line, but that was it. I blocked the number, but the calls kept coming from different ones. My blood ran cold. I knew that sound, that feeling. Someone was tracking her, keeping tabs on her every move, and now they were probably watching us right here, right now. Em, listen to me, I said, my voice shaking. You're in danger, serious danger. You need to leave right now. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. What are you talking about? Mike, you're freaking me out. Why would I be in danger? I couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't admit that I was the reason she was in this mess. That I was the one who had to kill her, or someone else would. But I had to get her out of there. I had to protect her no matter what. Please, Em, you have to trust me, I pleaded, grabbing her hand. You need to pack a bag and go somewhere safe, just for a few days, until I can figure out what's going on. She pulled her hand away, standing up and backing toward the door. Mike, you're scaring me. I don't understand what's happening. Why won't you tell me the truth? I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, the front door suddenly flew open, slamming against the wall with a deafening bang. Emily screamed, dropping her mug as it shattered on the floor. I jumped to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest as I spun around to face the doorway, but there was no one there, just the open door, leading out into the darkness, the night air chilling the room. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, just a shadow, darting across the front yard and disappearing into the trees. I bolted for the door, but by the time I reached it, whoever or whatever had been there was gone. The night was still, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I stood there for a long moment, staring into the blackness, my mind racing. Someone was watching us. Someone knew I was here, and they were making sure I knew it. I turned back to Emily, who was standing in the doorway, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. Get in the car, I said, my voice firm. Now. She didn't argue. We grabbed her purse, her keys, and nothing else. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew we couldn't stay here. We needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere they couldn't find us. But deep down, I knew that no matter where we went, we couldn't run from this. Not really. The darkness was closing in, and I was dragging her into it with me. And the worst part? I still had no idea who was behind this, or why. As we drove away from her house, the headlights cutting through the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every shadow seemed to move, every dark corner hiding something sinister. The road stretched out before us, long and empty, like it would never end. But I knew better. This road had a destination, and wherever it led, I wasn't sure either of us would survive the journey. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, the tension in the car so thick it was suffocating. Emily kept glancing at me, her eyes filled with questions she was too afraid to ask. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do next. The road ahead was a winding, narrow stretch of asphalt that seemed to lead into nothingness, the trees on either side looming like dark sentinels. I had no plan, no destination in mind. All I knew was that I had to keep her safe. But the further we drove, the more I realized how hopeless that seemed. Whatever was happening, it wasn't something I could just outrun. The dark web, the hit list, the shadowy figures watching us, it was all part of a world where the rules didn't make sense, and Emily had been dragged into it because of me. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye, trying to gauge how much she knew. She was biting her lip, staring out the window at the passing trees, her face pale in the dim light from the dashboard. "You okay?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. She didn't look at me, just nodded slightly. "I don't know, Mike. I really don't know." I wanted to tell her everything, to come clean and let her in on the nightmare I'd been living, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I had some answers. I was supposed to be the one protecting her, not the other way around. The road twisted sharply, and as I turned the wheel, I caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror. A flash of headlights, far back, but gaining on us. My heart skipped a beat. Someone was following us. They'd been there all along, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment. "Mike, where are we going?" Emily asked suddenly, her voice trembling. "Somewhere safe," I replied, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. But the truth was, I didn't know where safe was anymore. Not for us, not tonight. The car behind us was getting closer, the headlights brighter now, almost blinding in the mirror. My grip on the wheel tightened, my mind scrambling for options. We couldn't keep driving forever. I needed to think, to figure out a plan, but the fear was making it hard to focus. Suddenly, Emily's phone buzzed in her lap, startling both of us. She picked it up, her hands shaking, and stared at the screen. Her face went pale, and she turned the phone toward me. It was another text message, this time from an unknown number. The message was simple, just a single line of text. "You can't hide from us." A cold chill ran down my spine. They knew exactly where we were, and they were toying with us, letting us think we could escape. I slammed my foot on the gas, the engine roaring as we sped down the road, but the car behind us matched our speed, staying just far enough back to keep us in sight. I needed to lose them, and fast. My eyes darted to the side of the road, searching for anything. A side street, a dirt path, anything that could give us an edge. Then, up ahead, I saw it. A narrow gravel road, barely visible in the darkness, leading off into the woods. Without thinking, I yanked the wheel to the right, sending the car skidding onto the gravel path. The tyres kicked up a cloud of dust and rocks as we barreled down the narrow road, the trees closing in around us. Emily clutched the seat, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The road twisted and turned, barely wide enough for the car, branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers. I could feel the car behind us following, its headlights slicing through the darkness like a predator's eyes. But the path was too tight, too winding. If we could just stay ahead, maybe we could lose them. But then, out of nowhere, the path came to a dead end, the trees forming a thick wall in front of us. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop just inches from the trees. We were trapped. "Mike!" Emily's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear. "Get out!" I said, my voice hoarse. "We need to run!" We scrambled out of the car, the cold night air hitting us like a slap in the face. The forest around us was eerily silent, the only sound our ragged breathing. I grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her toward the trees, hoping we could lose ourselves in the darkness before they caught up. But as we ran, I could hear the crunch of gravel behind us, the sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. They were close, too close. I pushed Emily ahead of me, urging her to keep going, even as my lungs burned and my legs ached from the effort. The trees were thick, the underbrush grabbing at our clothes, slowing us down, but we couldn't stop. couldn't afford to lose momentum. I kept glancing back, catching glimpses of movement in the shadows, figures closing in on us. And then, without warning, Emily stumbled, her foot catching on a root. She went down hard, her cry of pain echoing through the forest. I spun around, reaching out to help her up, but before I could, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking our path. He was tall, his face hidden in the darkness, but I could see the glint of something in his hand, a knife, long and sharp. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen, Emily scrambling to her feet beside me. "Stay back," I growled, trying to sound braver than I felt. But the man didn't move, just stood there, watching us with an eerie stillness. Then, from behind us, I heard more footsteps, more voices. We were surrounded. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, the fear threatening to choke me. This was it. We were caught, and there was no way out. But just as I was about to give up, to throw myself at the man in a desperate attempt to save my sister, I heard something else, a low rumble, growing louder, coming from deeper in the forest. The ground seemed to vibrate beneath our feet, the trees shaking with the force of it. The man in front of us hesitated, his head turning toward the sound. And then, without warning, he took off, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost. The others followed, their footsteps fading into the distance. Emily and I stood there, stunned, not daring to move as the rumble grew louder, closer. The forest was alive with it, the air thick with tension. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. Silence fell over the woods once more, broken only by the sound of our laboured breathing. What was that?" Emily whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I admitted, my heart still racing. But whatever it was, it scared them off. We stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The darkness seemed to press in around us, the trees closing ranks like a living wall, blocking out any chance of escape. "We need to keep moving," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can't stay here." Emily nodded, still trembling, and we started walking, deeper into the forest, away from the road, away from whatever had driven those men off. But the fear lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind, because whatever had scared those men away, it was still out there. And it was getting closer. The forest seemed to swallow us whole as we pushed deeper into the trees. The darkness so thick, it felt like it was closing in from all sides. The air was heavy, damp, and the only sounds were our footsteps crunching over the undergrowth and the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. Every shadow seemed to shift and move, playing tricks on my eyes, making me jump at every slight sound. Emily clung to my arm, her grip tight, her breathing rapid. I could tell she was struggling to hold it together, but I couldn't blame her. I was just as terrified, my mind racing with 1,000 different fears. I kept replaying the events of the last hour over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out what we were dealing with. But nothing added up. The figures that had surrounded us in the woods, the strange rumble that sent them running, the unnerving silence that followed. It all felt like a nightmare, something too surreal to be real. But the fear, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, the cold sweat on my skin, those were real enough. We kept moving, deeper and deeper into the forest, the trees growing denser, the underbrush thicker with every step. The ground beneath our feet became uneven, roots and rocks jutting out of the earth, threatening to trip us up. But we couldn't stop, not even for a moment. Something was out there, something that had driven those men away, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out what it was. "Mike," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Where are we going?" I didn't have an answer. I just knew we had to keep moving, had to put as much distance between us and the road as possible. But the truth was, I was lost. The forest was a labyrinth, every direction looking the same, every tree a mirror of the last. My sense of direction had vanished the moment we'd left the car, and now we were wandering blind through a sea of shadows. "I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice low. "But we need to find shelter, somewhere to hide until morning." Emily nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear. She trusted me to protect her, to get us out of this, but I had no idea how to do that. I was as scared and confused as she was, maybe more so, because I knew the kind of people who were after us, the kind of people who didn't just give up. As we stumbled through the darkness, I started to notice something strange about the forest. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. The wind that had rustled the leaves earlier had died down, and the usual sounds of the night, crickets, distant animal calls, were gone. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of light, faint, barely there, but enough to catch my attention. I stopped, straining my eyes to see through the darkness, and there it was again, a small, pale light, flickering in the distance through the trees. "Shah, did you see that?" I whispered to Emily, my heart pounding. She nodded, her eyes wide. "What is it?" "I don't know," I said, though I had a sinking feeling I didn't want to find out. But at the same time, it was the only thing that seemed even remotely hopeful. Maybe it was a house, someone who could help us. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something dangerous. But we didn't have many options. We were lost, scared, and alone in the middle of a forest that seemed to get stranger with every step. So I made the decision. "Stay close to me," I told her, starting to move toward the light. We picked our way through the trees, the light growing brighter as we approached. The closer we got, the more I could see it wasn't just a single light, but several, faint, wavering glows, like lanterns or candles, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees. And then we broke through the tree line into a small clearing, and I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. In the center of the clearing was an old, dilapidated cabin, its wooden walls weathered and rotting, the roof sagging under the weight of years. The light was coming from inside, a warm, golden glow that seemed so out of place in the cold, dark forest. But that wasn't what sent a chill down my spine. It was the symbols. They were carved into the wooden walls of the cabin, strange, intricate patterns that twisted and spiraled across the surface like living things. They looked ancient, almost like runes, but more twisted, more sinister, and they were everywhere, covering the walls, the door, even the windows, which were dark and lifeless despite the light shining from within. Emily gasped, her grip on my arm tightening. "Mike, what is this place?" "I don't know," I whispered, unable to tear my eyes away from the symbols. They seemed to pulse, almost like they were alive, like they were watching us. But despite the fear gnawing at my insides, I couldn't ignore the light. There was something in that cabin, something that might help us. Maybe someone who could explain what the hell was going on, or maybe something far worse. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and started toward the cabin. Emily followed, her steps hesitant, every instinct in her body screaming at her to run the other way. I could feel it too, that primal fear that told you when something was wrong, when something was dangerous. But we had no choice. We needed shelter, and this was the only place we'd found. The closer we got to the cabin, the more the air seemed to change. It grew heavier, thicker, like we were walking through a fog that wasn't really there. My skin prickled, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. There was a smell too, faint but unmistakable, like something rotten, something decayed. We reached the front door, and I hesitated, my hand hovering over the old rusted handle. The light inside flickered, casting strange shadows that danced across the walls. I turned to Emily, who was watching me with wide, fearful eyes. "Stay behind me," I told her, and pushed the door open. It creaked on its hinges, the sound echoing in the silence of the forest. The inside of the cabin was even stranger than the outside. The light we'd seen was coming from a series of old oil lamps, hanging from the ceiling on rusted chains. They cast a dim, flickering glow over the room, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in more symbols, carved deep into the wood, like someone had spent years etching them into the surface. The floor was littered with strange objects, bones, twisted pieces of metal, and what looked like dried herbs. arranged in patterns that made no sense. And in the center of the room was a large stone altar stained dark with something I didn't want to think about. But it was what was on the altar that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a book, old and battered, its cover cracked and worn. But even from where I stood, I could see that it was bound in something that looked disturbingly like human skin. And the symbols, those same twisted, living symbols, were carved into its surface, writhing and shifting in the dim light. I could feel Emily trembling behind me, her fear almost palpable. I wanted to turn around, to leave, to run as far from this place as possible. But something held me there, rooted me to the spot. It was the book. Something about it called to me, and as much as I wanted to resist, I found myself stepping forward, drawn toward it like a moth to a flame. "Mike, don't," Emily whispered, but her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from far away. I reached out, my fingers hovering over the book's cover, the symbols seeming to shift and twist under my gaze. I could feel a strange energy emanating from it, something dark and ancient, something that sent shivers down my spine. And then, just as my fingers brushed the surface of the book, I heard it, a whisper, soft and sinister, curling through the air like smoke. "You were meant to find us." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was everywhere and nowhere, surrounding us, filling the cabin with its dark presence. Emily let out a strangled cry, and I could feel her tugging at my arm, trying to pull me away, but I couldn't move. The book held me in place, its presence overwhelming, its power undeniable. The symbols on its cover glowed faintly, pulsing with an unnatural light, and I knew, deep down, that this was what had driven those men away. This was what had been waiting for us, and as the whispers grew louder, more insistent, I realized with a sickening certainty that we had walked straight into a trap. "There is no escape," the voice hissed, echoing in my mind. The door slammed shut behind us, sealing us inside the cabin, and I knew, whatever was in this place, whatever had been waiting for us, it wasn't going to let us go. We were trapped, and the darkness was closing in. The cabin felt like it was alive, its walls pulsing with the same sinister energy that radiated from the book. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as the whispers intensified, wrapping around us like a cold, invisible fog. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get out of this place before it consumed us, but I was frozen in place, my hand hovering over that cursed book, unable to pull away. Emily was still behind me, her grip on my arm tight, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I could feel her terror, could feel her begging me to leave, to abandon whatever dark force had drawn us here. But something deeper inside me knew it was too late. We were caught in the web of something far older, far more dangerous than we could ever understand. The symbols on the book's cover glowed brighter, their twisted shapes dancing in the dim light. I could feel a pull, like a magnet, drawing me closer to the book, to the secrets it held. The whispers continued, growing louder, more urgent, as if they were pleading with me to open the book, to unleash whatever dark power was trapped within its pages. "Open it," the voice hissed in my mind, insistent, demanding. "You have come this far. There is no turning back." My fingers trembled as they brushed against the book's cover. The leather felt cold and slick beneath my touch, almost like skin, and I could feel the energy thrumming beneath it, alive and malevolent. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct, every shred of sanity left in me, screamed that whatever was inside that book was something I wasn't meant to see. But the pull was too strong, the darkness too powerful. I had to know. With a deep, shuddering breath, I gripped the edge of the cover and slowly lifted it. The pages were yellowed with age, brittle and worn, but they were filled with the same symbols that covered the walls of the cabin, twisted and dark, almost like they were written in blood. As I turned the pages, the whispers grew louder, more frantic, filling my mind with their sinister intent. And then, suddenly, the pages stopped turning. They fell open to a single blank page in the middle of the book, stark and empty compared to the chaotic symbols that filled the rest of the pages. But the whispers stopped, replaced by a deep, oppressive silence that pressed down on us like a weight. I stared at the blank page, confusion swirling in my mind. Why had the book led me here? Why had it drawn me in, only to show me nothing? But as I looked closer, I realized the page wasn't blank after all. Faint, almost invisible, there was something written there, in tiny, spidery handwriting. I squinted, trying to make out the words. They were old, faded, but as I read them, a cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. The blood of kin must seal the pact. My heart skipped a beat. The words burned into my mind, their meaning clear, their intent undeniable. The whispers hadn't drawn me here by accident. They hadn't just been waiting for anyone. They had been waiting for us. I turned to Emily, my mouth dry, my mind reeling. We need to leave, now! But she was already backing away from the book, her eyes wide with horror. She had seen the words too, understood what they meant. Mike, what does it mean? I didn't want to say it. Didn't want to admit the truth that was clawing its way into my mind. But there was no denying it now. No escaping what had been set in motion. The book, I said, my voice hollow. It's bound to us, to our family. Emily shook her head, her face pale. No, that can't be true. This has nothing to do with us. But even as she said the words, I could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear. She knew, deep down, that we couldn't escape this. That the darkness we had stumbled into was tied to something far older than either of us. Something that had been waiting, watching, for generations. And now, it had found us. The cabin seemed to close in around us, the walls pressing closer, the symbols glowing brighter, more sinister. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the rot of something ancient and evil that had been buried for far too long. I could feel it now, pressing against the edges of my mind, trying to break through, to take control. The blood of kin must seal the pact. The words echoed in my head, relentless, pounding in time with the thudding of my heart. I could feel the book's power, its dark energy pulsing through me, filling me with a terrible realization. This wasn't just about me, it was about Emily too. It had always been about both of us. The whispers began again, low and insistent, urging me forward, pushing me toward a decision I didn't want to make. But I could feel the darkness closing in, could feel the cabin pressing down on us, the weight of centuries of curses and bloodshed bearing down on our shoulders. Mike! Emily's voice was a trembling whisper, her eyes filled with tears. What do we do? I looked at her, my heart breaking. I had brought her here, led her into this nightmare. And now, I had to make a choice. But before I could say anything, the book began to shake, vibrating with an unnatural energy. The symbols on its pages glowed brighter, burning into my mind, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Seal the pact, they demanded. Seal it with blood. I backed away, panic rising in my chest. I couldn't do it. I couldn't harm my sister, the only family I had left. But as I stepped back, the cabin seemed to come alive, the walls creaking and groaning, the floorboards shifting beneath our feet. The darkness was growing, expanding, filling every corner of the room, swallowing the light, the air, everything. And then I felt it, a sharp, searing pain in my hand. I looked down and saw the book, its cover now burning hot, the symbols glowing with an intense, fiery light. My hand was fused to it, the pain lancing up my arm, paralyzing me. Mike! Emily screamed, rushing toward me, but before she could reach me, the cabin shuddered, the walls closing in even further, blocking her path. The whispers were deafening now, filling my mind, drowning out everything else. And as the darkness consumed me, as the pain from the book threatened to tear me apart, I realized what I had to do. I had to break the pact. I had to stop the darkness, even if it meant sacrificing everything. With the last of my strength, I turned toward Emily, tears streaming down my face. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice cracking. And then I did the only thing I could. I plunged my hand, the one fused to the book, into my chest. The pain was immediate, blinding, but I kept going, feeling the book's power surging through me, its darkness pulling me under. The whispers reached a crescendo, screaming in my mind, but I forced myself to hold on, to keep going. Emily was screaming, but I couldn't hear her anymore. All I could hear were the whispers, the demands, the ancient curses that had bound our family to this darkness for so long. But as I drove the book deeper into my chest, as the darkness began to consume me, I felt something else. A release. A breaking of chains that had held for generations. The last thing I saw was Emily's face, her eyes wide with horror, before the darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke up, I was lying on the forest floor, the morning sun filtering through the trees, warm and bright. The cabin was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. The book was gone too, the pain in my chest a dull ache, a reminder of what I had done. Emily was beside me, tears streaking her face, but alive. She was alive. I had broken the pact. The darkness was gone, but at what cost? As we walked out of the forest, the morning light guiding our way, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what had happened, of the curse that had plagued our family for so long. But I had saved her. I had saved my sister, and for that, I would pay any price.